Aisha, welcome to the podcast. We are so glad to have you here at the STEM Lab podcast. So, I would like for you just to start us out with telling my listeners a little about yourself and your career path.
Well, I am an assistant professor in the Department of Epidemiology at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. To be specific, I am in the environmental epidemiology division, and I like to call myself an environmental neuroepidemiologist because I study environmental risk factors for neurological disorders like autism spectrum disorder, dementia, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, for the people who might not be familiar with that other term. And how did I get here? Was that the question?
Yeah, so tell us, how did you decide to actually go into this career field? Like, did you always hear about it, or did you just happen up on it? How did that happen for you?
Oh yeah, no, I definitely happened upon it. So I used to do the AmeriCorps program when I was an undergrad.
Okay.
And so my placement for AmeriCorps was doing in-home therapy for children with autism. So therapy and respite care for the parents. And so after each session, the parents would always want to sit down and just chat, they have an adult conversation. And they'd give me this long list of why they thought their child had autism. So they say, I think I ate too much fish, or I ate a lot of Subway. And of course, you always got the option of, I think it was the vaccines, right?
Right.
And so I said, well, I can go and maybe get a degree to figure out what causes autism. Now, I had never heard of the term epidemiology before, but I had seen a book that said epidemiology. It was in a stack of books sitting outside of a classroom, just, grab free books. It was like Epidemiology 1972 or something.
Okay.
And I said, okay, well, epidemiology sounds like a way that I can figure out what causes autism. So thinking about autism, we know that there's a genetic risk factor and probably an environmental trigger. The thing about genes, though, is that you really can't change your genes, but I could definitely change what you're exposed to. So I thought, environmental epidemiology is the best option for me. Now, I used to say you can change your genes, but now they have CRISPR, so you can change your genes, but there's still some ethical questions.
I was about to say, I don't think in humans we could do it. Maybe in a bacteria, but a human, not just quite. That would not possibly work. Well, I heard you say you picked up the book because you didn't know what epidemiology was. For our listeners who might not know, can you explain a little about epidemiology to us?
Yeah, sure. I always tell people, think about the term epidemics. That's the term that more people are familiar with. But when I say epidemiology, people usually think epidermis. They say, oh, you study skin. Yeah. I say, no, that's dermatology. But epidemics, so it's the study of disease association. And so that's what epidemiology is. Just how do diseases occur? What are the disease patterns? How do they spread? Who do they impact? And once you get a disease, how long does it take before you die from that disease? That's the kind of stuff.
I mean, to put it in perspective, how long is this gonna last and kill you? Well, look, it was
to the point.
Well, for me, one of the terms that was very new to me when I looked at your web page was that neuro epidemiology, and I don't think, even as a researcher, I had ever heard that term used. So, explain to me, what is neuro epidemiology?
So it's kind of a term that we have mushed together from neurology to epidemiology. It's not a word that's in the dictionary. Okay. And when you type it into Word, it's going to say that you misspelled something. But it is just the study of epidemiology with neurological outcomes. So anything dealing with the brain, that includes developmental disorders, neurocognition, mental health, all of that is included in neuroepidemiology.
Gotcha. All right, that makes sense. I was just like, oh, this is a new term, Aisha, on some things that I don't even know about.
It's not a real
term. Well, look, in looking at your research interests, I saw that one of yours was looking at Alzheimer's disease among middle to old age Black men in the United States. And so can you talk a little bit about that research with us?
Well, it's something that I'm collaborating with a man named Roland Thorpe. He is a full tenured professor at Johns Hopkins, and all of his research focuses on Black men's health.
Okay.
But we know that dementia in Black men is it's similar to that of white men, but the severity of it is worse in Black
Hmm.
men. And the length of time that Black men live with dementia is longer than compared to their non-Black counterparts. So,
Now,
I mean, just thinking about my family, my grandfather died after having dementia for several years. And so I wanted to start looking into how can we prevent dementia overall? And I always ask people this random question. So let's see how you answer it. The question I always ask is when you get older, do you think it will be worse to have your cognition and lose some of your physical ability, or to be physically able and not have your cognition, in which case you don't even realize what's going on?
yeah, for me, it's gonna be I can lose a little mobility as long as I can outthink you.
Yeah, and that's the way I feel about it too. As long as my brain is working,
Girl,
I can hobble around for several years.
look, no, but it's so funny you ask that because that's exactly one of my fears of old age is that I'm not gonna be able to remember the stuff that I know. And I love, that's my thing. I can remember way back when, and I just need to tell you all the things that I remember. Tonight, I would just really be upset. Look, I see myself sitting in the wheelchair telling you all the stuff that
Right. Yeah, and
you.
that's me. That's what I see. As long as by the time I get to be 80 something, there would be so many machines that I could use to get around.
Hello. There is a robot that will pick me up, put me in the shell, and walk with me.
Right.
We good.
I could call a car to drive me around. I don't even need to pay a driver.
Exactly. So I'm so good on that. Yes. Well, hey, thank you for that. Well, let me ask this question in talking about Black men and dementia and Alzheimer's, because I always in my mind, in molecular mind, think that are there any particular markers or anything that kind of predisposition us to certain things? Do you know if there has been anything found that kind of shows that it is because of maybe some genetic factor that has us um, having dementia for longer periods of time or being more susceptible to it?
I mean, well, there's always a little bit of genetics involved, but as far as the known factors for dementia,
Mm-hmm.
one is level of education. So a lower level of education increases the risk of an earlier diagnosis of dementia. And we're not sure if that's because of the way the brain is working, because you know so
Okay.
much, or is it just because you can't fake your way through a diagnostic test? I think when you have a higher level of education and people are asking you questions for a test on dementia, you know how to fake your way through some of it. But the other known factor is cardiovascular diseases.
Oh,
And
really?
so we know that CVD is higher in the African American community, which means that might also increase the risk of dementia in the African American community. But in line
Hmm.
with that, education level and cardiovascular disease are both vastly different in the African American community versus our white counterparts. So I think people tend to focus on genetic differences in education, but you really have to focus on the systemic problem that leads to that lower education or that leads to that cardiovascular disease. It's not just because we're Black, it's what we're subjected to because we're Black,
Right.
at least.
And that's where the epigenetics come in, which was my
Mm-hmm.
second postdoc, in how there are a lot of environmental factors as an epidemiologist. You understand this? That can affect actually the genes themselves. And so, um, yeah, I can see that being a part of the problem. So moving from that, I heard you also say that you study autism as well. And so when you're looking at autism, what has your research found?
With autism overall, so I haven't done many studies as far as health disparities in autism, but most of the studies that I've done are population based. The study that
Okay.
I'm currently working on is in Denmark. So Denmark is 97, 98% Danish, not just white, like
Right.
we're Danish. So it's hard to really look at health disparities there. But what I have seen in my previous research is these associations between proximity to industrial facilities that pump out a lot of toxicants and increased risk of autism spectrum disorder, or
Okay.
increases in risk with higher exposure to ambient air pollutants like lead and mercury. So those are the things that I've seen so far. And I'm working on a proposal right now where I'm going to try to see if there's an amplification of risk
Okay.
in lower income communities for children who are, one, exposed to air pollutants, but two, also exposed to psychosocial stressors common to underserved populations. So
And
that's
what
my
about
next.
lead-based paint? Is that not also one of the risk factors? Because you usually find that in lower income housing.
Exactly. So those are the kinds of things I'm doing in this study that are the proposal rather that I'm writing now. So I'm looking at multiple sources of exposure to toxicants, including lead-based paint, air pollution, proximity to industrial facilities, proximity to highways, and all of those things. First in relation to the biological markers. So I think a lot of studies have shown associations between air pollution and increased risk of autism, but nobody's really tried to look at the in between with those two. Like, is the air pollution leading to higher blood lead levels, which might then lead to autism? And
Gotcha.
so that's the first step.
Well, one of my questions is like, have you or do you know of any research that actually talks about racial disparities with autism? Do we find that we see it in more African American than we do other nationalities or other races? And if we see any gender disparities as well?
Well, the disparities that we really seen with autism is that there is a later diagnosis of autism in African American children.
Yeah.
Yeah, primarily because instead of getting an autism diagnosis, they usually get stuck with an ADHD diagnosis.
Hmm.
So that's part of it. And then the other part is that to get an autism diagnosis is a multi-step process. You have to see a lot of specialists. And to see specialists, as a parent, you have to have the time to take off work and take your child to see those specialists, right?
Yes.
And if you have an hourly wage job, you can't just take off for the whole day to sit in a clinic and have your child given a 3-hour assessment. So instead, a lot of African American children and children from lower income families don't get an autism diagnosis until school. So first they get a school designation, and it's usually a teacher recognizes that something's not right here, and based on that school designation, the school will find services to get them an official diagnosis. But if you're not a parent with a lot of time, you can't take your 2-year-old child to a psychiatrist and a psychologist and a pediatric neurologist and all of that stuff. You just don't have time for that.
Right. And and I'm just going to bring this in because I have family and I'm in this community, is that a lot of time in our community, kids will be deemed just bad before they're deemed to have anything wrong with them. And it's like, oh, just bad. You just need the whooping, which is what personally my aunt would tell me about my son. And then when my son got to school, the teachers picked up on, he's just bad. He was overactive. And so I was like, to me, this looks like ADHD, some of the things that I've heard. So because I am that parent who has the time, I was able to actually take him to a specialist and actually get him diagnosed with it. because the teachers would not believe that he had it because he was smart and he could make all the A's. And then when we went to the specialist, he said he's been able to basically fake his way through because he's smart. But now that they're throwing more and more things at him, he can't even make that happen. So it's now causing him to act out in class. Right. And so this is how we ended up with his diagnosis. And the teacher still didn't want to believe me.
Well, it's important to have parents that can advocate for their children. That's one of the other big issues that I've seen, is that a lot of parents are just not able to advocate the way that they need to, especially when it comes to getting services for their children. There are some people who get paid specifically as advocates. They're called parent advocates for school systems, and you can pay these people to go to the school and go to the doctor and advocate for you. But I prefer that people are just better able to advocate for themselves. And you can only do that if you have a certain level of education and a certain level of confidence that comes with, as I call myself, with being excessively educated.
Isha, it's so funny that you say this, because I would always think, what about the mom that can't do this? Because I would go and sit in class with him, because, you say he doing all this, I need to see for myself. So I would go to class, I would, take my notes. Believe me, I know the teacher was like, she don't have no job. Like, she always here. Oh, I got one, but between the hours of 10 to 11 in the class he takes with you, I'm coming.
Right.
And I'll be right back to work afterwards. But in that time, I'm coming. But I used to really wonder, the other kids who I saw was always in the office too. I was like, man, it may not be what they're saying, but the parent doesn't have the time. And so that's one of the things, that I'm really passionate about too, is just advocating for those who can't for themselves. I feel like sometimes I have to make a stink in the public school system, or when we were in it, so that parents who did not have the time could benefit from me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Well, look, it was something that I saw on a post of yours, and I think this is it, and it might not be, but it was that you were working to kind of help minority students who were pursuing a PhD. And I wanted for us to talk a little bit about that, because I'm always so happy to see that type of work taking place. So can you tell us a bit about the work that you do with current PhDs and them persisting in their programs?
Yeah, for sure. So when I got to Hopkins, I noticed that we were getting ready to hire a diversity officer for the school, but we had not hired one yet. And I saw a need for trying to develop a network for students and postdocs, because postdocs are often kind of overlooked. I thought back on my own experience in my PhD program. I was the only African-American student in my group. So, and then I went to school in Texas. So let me say that. And so we had lots of Latinx and Hispanic students. And that was what they considered diversity at the school. Nobody really considered Black students as a whole. And so I was the only one. And being that isolated, it was just hard. Like, there were lots of times where I think I was driving home at least every weekend for the first few months. And then I realized that there were some other African American students in other programs like health behavior and what's another one that African American students tend to flock towards, mental health and things like that. But in epidemiology, it was just me.
Just you.
Yeah, just me. And my classes, when we got put into groups, nobody wanted to be in a group with me.
That's the way you felt. Yes, I know.
Yeah, it's like nobody wants to be in a group with me. Until they found out I knew what I was doing, then everybody wanted to be in a group with me.
Right.
But just based on that experience, I thought, I don't want these students at Hopkins to feel the way that I felt when I was working on my PhD. And we know that a lot of students from underrepresented backgrounds will drop out within the first 2 years. And what we found from interviews is that it's one, they didn't feel supported, and two, they didn't have a lot of mentoring. So the purpose of this program that I developed is specifically to develop a network of students from an underrepresented background. So that includes students of African descent, Hispanic or Latinx students, indigenous students, and students from Southeast Asia. So I think a lot of times people overlook Filipino and Vietnamese students, and they just say Asian. There are not a lot of Southeast Asian students in PhD programs. Like right now in the program, we have two. So I've put all of those students in this program, and what we do is, one, we provide mentoring for them, so that if they have questions, they have somebody that they can go and ask. So not just faculty mentoring, but we have peer plus mentoring, which means
that's great.
If you are a student working on your dissertation, you have a postdoc that you can go to that has worked on a dissertation previously. Or if you just started school, you have a student towards the end of their program who could tell you how to get through the beginning of the program. Gotcha. And we also have money for travel awards when people can travel again, to go to conferences and things like that.
They're all virtual though, you know.
Eventually we'll get to that. And we have a lot of professional development seminars. So most of the effort that I put into the program is putting these professional development seminars together. Okay. And then I have a group of students that focus on the social aspect. So I tell them I'm the serious side, and they can focus on the social side. And we toggle back and forth between professional development and social activities, so nobody feels overwhelmed. But that's the overview of the program.
Girl, that is so awesome. And I remember reading it and thinking once again, man, Aisha is really doing it, because for me, it was Dr. Dale. And he had all of us students together, so you knew once a year you all were going to meet. So I always felt like, I knew somebody on campus in a graduate program if they weren't in my own. So, at UAB, he really fostered that community for us. So we knew that they were there. And so you could talk to people about the problems that you were having. And that was so necessary. And I don't think I knew how necessary it was until I talked to others like you, saying you were there by yourself. And immediately I can think in my first year of 4 other Black students that I automatically knew and would go and ask questions to. So it's really important to have, especially when we talk about persisting. And so I'm glad to see that you're doing that.
I mean, I really use UAB as an example a lot of times when people are saying, we're having issues with this, that, and the other. And I say, well, at UAB, this is the way they used to do it. And it worked really well.
Look,
UAB knew what they were doing.
I know.
And Cynthia Scott knew how to make it work.
Hey, Cynthia Scott, Dr. Dale, and Wanda Jordan. If I didn't know them 3 names and had seen them talk look, Cynthia Scott, I think used to go to church with me, and I would stop her, be like, so I got some questions. It's like, can't even let her pray without a question or an answer. But it's funny because you and I can sit here and we can call them out because we knew who to go to if we had issues, and they knew how to handle things. Mm-hmm. I never really remember having a problem that didn't get resolved.
Right.
Yeah. So kudos to them, hats off, because it may need to be a study done. Actually,
it should be. I mean, I use them as an example. That's what I thought when I built the program. I said, I want the students to have somebody to go to when they have questions. And even if I don't have the answer, I want to know who to send them to who has the answer.
Well, let me ask this, because I heard you say that you also have faculty mentor. Are the faculty just on campus, or do you look to try and place them with minority faculty in their discipline across the country? Like, how does that work? Is it just Hopkins and the students interacting with only the faculty there?
So they have a faculty member that they're assigned to that's just at Hopkins. Okay. And as a part of the program, we're trying to expand their network by inviting faculty from underrepresented, well, not just faculty at academic institutions. Let me be clear. We're also inviting PhDs from government and industry to come in and meet with them so that they can broaden their network. Because the other issue with getting a PhD is that they think they're being prepared for a faculty position, but there aren't that many faculty positions to go around. So I'm trying to make sure that they know that you don't have to go into academia and spend all of your time trying to support 90% of your salary. You can go somewhere else with your PhD, and that is okay.
Look, I had to learn that out of the fact. I keep thinking, because, two people, one went off and got an MD after the PhD, and another went off and became a PA. And I was like, so y'all didn't tell me? Like, there were other things that we could have done? Like, how did I end up just here? And I have to realize, I'm where I'm supposed to be, apparently. But there are other options, and I'm so glad you say that, because I really try to talk to my students as well. It was like, there are options that you don't know of and probably hadn't even thought about, but they are there. And so, like you, I share with them, hey, there are many other ways to skin a cat. I promise.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a panel so far from people who are in industry, including nonprofit and for-profit industry. Mm-hmm. So let students know, you can make a whole lot more money if you go and work for the man.
You so funny. Look, well, I don't know if you know Dr. Betty Booker, but she's out in California and she works for a biotech company. And I was like, Betty, you didn't tell me? Like, you could have said, Sabrina, this is the way we should go. Like, you just let me trace off on into academia, like, hey. But but the thing is, she did it first as well. She did, is it Stillman, right below Birmingham?
And Tuscaloosa?
She taught there first, and then she was like, she realized that's when she skipped herself on over into a biotech. So when you realize what the pay is, you're like, oh, wait a minute. I spent all those years for what?
Yeah, and then with government, you can get a salary that's similar to academia, but you only work from 9 to 5. So we have our government panel in November. Okay. And I worked for the Environmental Protection Agency before I came back to academia through my postdoc at Harvard. And, it's a really good place to work, especially if you have children. If you want to be able to get home to your children, government is a good option. But for somebody like me, the other issue with government was that there was no motivation to pump out a lot of work. Everything was just kind of slow and steady. We'll get to it eventually. And I think I'm that kind of person that needs to always be producing something. You need to read my papers. I need to do a lecture. I need to go to a conference.
Look, if only I had your energy. But since I hear you talking about, how you matriculated through, and you just mentioned your postdoc at Harvard. So let's talk a little bit about your pathway. How did you start in on the STEM pathway? Was it elementary school when you first realized that you kind of like science, or did it happen later on? So what was that pathway like for you to get to the place that you are now?
I mean, I always liked questions, and I still ask questions. Like, my friends always say when they say something, they're like, and Aisha, just try to limit your follow-up questions. I always have follow-up questions. Like, I need to know how we get to this point. I was always decent in science, but what I was always really good at was math.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So math is really my thing. Even my GRE score reflects that. I tell people, if you look at my GRE score, the verbal part suggests that I don't speak English. That English is not my first language, but
girl, stop.
But the qualitative part, the quantitative part, is the part that I excelled in.
Okay.
Going back to the GRE, I don't think that's the best measurement of intelligence overall, because if that's how people talk, then how are you conveying information to the lay public? Nobody uses those words. This is not, the King's English.
Hello.
And I think that's another reason that the cohorts for PhD programs are not as diverse as they could be. GRE scores really mess people up. But going back to how I got to STEM, so I was good at math, and I went to UAB, And at first I wanted to be a neonatologist. That's all I wanted to do was
Oh, okay.
take care of the babies. But then I did a summer program with Marsha Kelly Sutton.
That's who it is.
That's a
Miss
person.
Sutton,
She was
yes.
another one of those big diversity people.
Yes, with the silver hair.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Fabulous Marsha Kelly Sutton.
Yes, ma'am. You see, I have to do it. Yes.
But what I learned in that program is that medicine was not for me.
Oh, okay.
And
I don't think that was the purpose of the program, but okay.
I'm sure it wasn't. I think it was to help people prepare for the MCAT and all of that. But what I learned more than anything is that I can stand the sight of blood, but the scent of blood and rotting flesh and burning flesh and all the other wonderful fluids that come out of people's bodies is not something that
Not for you.
well, yeah, that wasn't for me. And so for a while, honestly, once I graduated, I was thinking, well, what do I do with my life? And that's when I met you at McWane Center.
Oh.
Yeah, so I got a bachelor's degree in biology and I started working for this science center, science museum. And that's where I met you. And that was really just like an in-between time. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life for sure. And I had a great time at McWane. Let me say this. McWane Center was one of the most fun jobs I ever had, but I always knew it was just like a purgatory kind of transition.
Gotcha.
And I was just there trying to figure out what to do with my life.
All of us were. It was a part of my postdoc. So it was my second postdoc, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I was realizing that being at the bench all the time wasn't the postdoc I really wanted. I needed to be doing something that I thought was benefiting somebody. And so that came along with National Science Foundation had GK-12 fellows. And that meant that you were in graduate school and then you went out into the community. And I had done that during my graduate studies. Mm-hmm. And so they had an opening to run that program. And so I was like, oh, that's for me. And so that's how I ended up down at McWane and teaching teachers in the summertime how to do molecular biology in their standard science classroom, and then having them bring their students in throughout the school year.
Right.
So yeah.
So I did that for a while, and then I decided to go and get the master's degree in epidemiology. And honestly, that was the last degree I thought I would get. But once I got that master's degree, I was working at the health department. And I realized that with a master's degree, you can really only ever do what people tell you to do. And I wanted to research autism, like I said before. Like I want to research autism. And at the health department in Jefferson County, they were like, no, the issue in Jefferson County is STDs and cardiovascular disease. That is what we do here. We don't do autism. So I said, okay, well, I'll go and get a PhD so I can do what I want to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the way I found my mentor is I just Googled environmental factors and autism or something like that. And this guy, Muhammad Hussein Rabar, came up and I shot him an email saying, look, I've been trying to figure my life out and this is what I think I want to do. And are you taking students? And he looked at my CV and all of that. And he said, yeah, you seem like a good student. I'll take you. So I went to Houston one time to find a place to live. And then the next time I came back, I was moving to Houston to start my PhD program.
Wow. Really?
Yeah.
Isha, you do know that's not the normal trajectory for a graduate student. So you have just now gave a whole new blueprint.
Yeah, use Google. Google is a good tool.
They say you can find anything, but I did not know you can find your mentor as well.
You can. But I made sure I read his research and I spoke to some of his previous mentees to see how they felt. So that's the other thing I tell.
Because you found them on Google too. Okay.
Well, I found their names in the papers, and then I Googled the names from the papers.
Wow. Well, you have just done the absolute. I love it though, because this is so, well, to me, it's unconventional, because I'm like, what? I would have never. You're going to make me start Googling some stuff I want to do and be like, hey, I just want to talk to you. You got a job over here.
Yeah, and that's what I tell students. Like, sometimes it's okay to send an email on a whim. You just have to be clear about what you want. I get a lot of emails from students that say something generic, like, I'm really interested in your research and I was wondering if you're taking a student. That's too random.
Okay.
You need to say, I read your paper on this and I found it really interesting the way that you did that. And I was thinking, I kind of want to do that too. So, and here's my experience. Here's how I can contribute to your program. That's the other thing. Like, we need to figure out some kind of a mutual relationship. You can't just copy my brain and get what you want out of me and me not get something out of you. That's not how this works.
Well, look, no, but you just dropped a true gem. So for the listeners out there, she really just told you how that you have to be able to do something mutually. You have to be able to give back as well as receive. Can't just write generically, oh yeah, I like what you're doing. It's like, so what part of it do you like? I'm not clear on that. But no, that is a really good key point. So I just really had to put a pin right there because students need to hear that.
Yeah,
Sometimes,
and if you could send an example of what you can contribute. So the thing I sent Dr. Rabar was a copy of my master's thesis. And it was really just like, look, I write really well. Look at how well I write. Like, if I can write this, I can write all of your papers, which is what I did. Like, I got there and I wrote tons of papers.
No, but that's awesome because, again, students don't always see the value in the writing process, and so just to be able to say, like, look, this is what I can contribute to you because I am a good writer and I will be able to make sure you get publications. That's gold for any professor. So, look, I'm learning a thing or two here myself. I'm like, no, because I have so much things sitting up, Aisha, it just doesn't even make sense. In my head, piles of data in, the writing part, because I didn't really do that. It's just like, I gotta write, oh, Lord. So, it's one of those where I gotta close the door and climb in a hole. So I can tell you really enjoy it. So you're like, what? Give me that data. Yes.
Yeah, I write a paper fast.
Look, you heard
writing machine.
Girl, I'm gonna send it to you and be like, Aisha, so this was my thoughts.
Well, I have to understand what you're talking. I don't always understand what you're talking about. You got my random text messages where I'm like, hey, can you explain this to me? What does this mean? Can I do this?
It is so funny. I was like, did I just get a text message about epigenetic and methylation from Aisha? Yeah. It was so random, but I was like, okay, I'll tell her what I know.
But that's what's good about knowing people. It's like, I know I don't know this, but I know who knows.
Exactly. Girl, and I'm always here to help. I really just thought it was funny. I was like, this is what happens when you have friends with science minds. This is how we think. This is what we're thinking about today. Well, look, so tell us, we've talked a lot about, just all that you do. When you were an undergraduate, did you go forward and have any scholarships or anything that helped you through? Just trying to give students who might be in college ways to stay or persist in the STEM pipeline, because we know in our community that finances usually come and play in that. So were you helped along the way at all by any scholarships or anything like that, or programs?
Yeah, so in undergrad, I had the Minority Presidential Scholarship.
Okay.
And so that got me all the way through undergrad. Now for my master's degree, and this is the thing with MPHs, and a lot of master's degrees are just not funded. A master's degree is usually to give you a bump in your career or a transition into a PhD program. So a lot of people don't fund master's degrees, but for my PhD program, I was on a traineeship with HRSA. What does HRSA stand for? Like Human Research and something with public health.
Okay.
So I had this traineeship with HRSA, which was just for any PhD students in epidemiology at the school. For my postdoc, so let me going back to my postdoc, I did a 1 year of postdoctoral training at the Environmental Protection Agency, realized that government wasn't for me. And so here's how I found my next mentor. For my postdoc mentorship, I had been going to conferences, and I met this guy, Mark Weiskopf, at conferences. And I would stay in touch with him, especially when I was working on my dissertation, because he had done something similar, just asking him, what do you think about this process? What do you think about that?
Okay.
So I shot him an email saying, hey, do you remember me from everything? I'm at the EPA now. and I think it's time for me to go. Are you taking PostDocs? And he was like, yeah. So
Look, girl.
similar to Houston, I went up to Boston one time to find a place to live, and then I went back and moved.
This seemed to be a pattern with you. Look, listeners, please listen. All you got to do, Google the person or meet them at a conference, send them an email, and then move there and find the apartment. This is how it goes. This is the blueprint that we did not know existed.
Well, that's one of the reasons that I made sure when I wrote the proposal for the program that I started at Hopkins, that I added money for travel for conferences, because I said you have to go to conferences to network and meet people. It's the way you get ahead. It's the way you build collaborations for papers, and it's the way you find your next mentor. You have to go to conferences.
I mean, that is such awesome gems of wisdom right there, because you don't think about it. You think about conferences as a way to basically pad your CV, a way to say, hey, I'm an expert in this, but not necessarily in a way to say, hey, this is me finding my next job, my next mentor, my next step. So yes.
Yeah. So I tell students that too when they go to conferences and they're running around, running behind me, trying to have lunch with me. And I'm like, no, go sit at that table over there with those people you don't know. Don't sit with me. Go meet somebody new. You know me. I can only help you so much and broaden your network.
To learn a thing or two. I am still one of those, as much as I talk, it's still shy with network because people don't know. So it's like, they may not want to hear my mouth all day. So let me
well, you do have to be able to catch social cues, so you can tell when people are okay with being talked to and when they don't want to talk to you. You do have to be able to catch those.
Well, Aisha, look, your story is just one that I always like, because as you continuously show that you don't have to follow the beaten path, like you can go off. What I always like is that you are always authentically you. And I think that is one of the keys to your success. You know, you are a person whose team seems to know what you want and you go for it. And what you don't let stop you is all of the trappings that we normally will say, oh, well, that's not the way people normally do it. You're supposed to do it like this. And you're like, no, like I'm gonna do it like this. And if it don't work, then I'll come back and do it like you said it should be done. So with that being said, tell us, if I always like to cap our conversation with, if you could talk to yourself at any point in your career, at any stage or age, and you wanted to tell them to persist in a STEM career, what would you say to yourself? And at what age would that be?
I think, you try to keep people or catch people's attention usually around middle school. That's when people lose interest in STEM. So I would tell, not necessarily myself, but my parents. And my parents were good at this, so I don't really need to tell my parents. Let me say, I would tell other people's parents.
Okay.
Make sure you enroll your kids in these summer programs. There's so many summer enrichment programs specifically for convincing students and children from underrepresented backgrounds to stay in STEM. I used to get so annoyed when I was little because my cousins would be at the YMCA and they'd be playing soccer, and my sister and I would be enrolled in some program in Auburn, some STEM program. And I was like, I don't want to keep doing that. I want to have fun in the summer. My parents were like, no, you're learning something new this summer. Have fun. And it's interesting how many of those people I'm still in contact with. And those are the people who are MDs now and other PhDs. And so when you have a group of children who look like you, and at least some of them are still interested in STEM, it kind of encourages you to stay interested in STEM as well.
Hey, that is really good.
The other good thing about those programs is that they're usually led by people from underrepresented backgrounds. So now you're getting to see people that look like you doing what you're considering doing. You're getting to see scientists like Dr. Sabrina Walthall. You're getting to see Aisha Dickerson, because I always mentor in these programs in the summer because I know how much of an impact it had on me. So I want to make sure that the students get that same impact And the other thing I would tell myself in undergrad is don't take 8 o'clock classes.
That'll make me laugh. But yes, not the thing to do, especially if you're going to sleep on the front row,
Yeah.
i.e. Sabrina Walker.
And the sad part is that my older cousin told me that. She said, don't register for 8 o'clock classes. And I said, no, you know, I want to keep the same schedule I had in high school. Like I did not calculate in the fact that without my parents telling me to go to sleep, that there would be no sleep schedule.
Right.
That getting up at 8 o'clock might not be the best option when you didn't go to bed until 2 o'clock because your friends decided that they wanted to go and have a barbecue chicken baked potato at Al's or Purple Onion or something like that at 2 o'clock in the morning. So that's the other thing I would tell me. And the third thing that I would probably tell myself, and this might be from probably my PhD self, I would tell me, don't limit yourself to the people around you at the school. Okay. If you can't find your circle at your school, step out to another school. So there were plenty of HBCUs around Houston that had PhD programs that I probably could have broadened my network out to them. Instead, I was staying in this little circle at the University of Texas, which made it harder for me to kind of feel like I belonged. But now they have social media. They didn't have social media when
I know, right?
Now you have like the Black women PhDs and the Black men PhD groups.
The women
they have little working things within your city, and you can go and you can meet other Black PhDs or other Black PhD students. That was harder to do when I was in school, and let somebody say, oh, I know somebody else working on a PhD, let me introduce you to them. You just didn't know who to find. So that's the other thing I would say. Yeah.
No, those are really some great pearls of wisdom, and especially the last one about being in a PhD program and looking to other colleges that might have them, especially if you are feeling definitely alone. And I just want to touch on this because you brought it up, feeling like you do not belong there. And we talk about imposter syndrome a lot. And so if you could, just for a moment, speak on how has imposter syndrome affected your persistence in STEM? Like, did it at some point grow and made you want to think about getting out of STEM? Or was it one of those little pebbles in the road that you always had to kick to the side?
It never made me want to get out. I think the biggest thing with imposter syndrome is thinking that you're not quite good enough. And so you do everything harder. Yeah, and I think that's common in the African American community overall. They always say you have to do twice as much to get half as much accolades and attention. And so I've just always been conditioned to do twice as much. That's just what I do. And even now, so I recently got a grant fund, I guess that was last month, and I was telling my department chair just so it would be on his list. And he said, oh, that's great. We were expecting you to do great things. So I said, well, that's good to hear, because when I got hired, my only goal was don't disappoint them. Don't make these people regret hiring you.
Really?
Yeah, that was my thought. Like, do not make them regret hiring you. Get the money, write the papers, get the money. And I've written so many grant proposals, and there are only 2 so far that haven't been funded. And that I don't think I would have. I'm actually overfunded now because I was just pumping out grant proposals because I wanted to make sure I had enough money, and now I have too much money.
That is wonderful. I'm quite sure if I was on that trajectory, look, not even had thought, because I came to teach. That was my whole thing, and to make sure that I did a great job at that, which is why I chose a small liberal arts college. So, I'll have to talk to you more. I just want to say, though, it has been such a pleasure catching up and chatting with you and just hearing about your story in STEM and how you have not only persisted and made it through STEM, but you're reaching back. And I think that's such an important factor, especially in our community, that we do set up for the next students to be successful. And just to hear about your program at Hopkins really warms my heart. Like when I read it in your news feed, I was like, yes, somebody, she gets it. You know, Aisha walking in and she's like, let me help y'all change this landscape right here. Because we need to get them in and we need to keep them here. So I'm quite sure the students and Hopkins will be blessed by what you put on the table. So I really thank you for joining us here at the STEM Lab podcast. Is there any last words that you like? If people would like to contact you, where can you be found? You want to give us any of your handles?
You know, I don't know my Twitter or my Instagram handle, but I know that if you search for my name, they come up. Okay. I do have Twitter now. Like, that was something that the school encouraged me to do, and they sent me a PowerPoint presentation for how to run a Twitter page. So I'm still kind of learning.
Girl, you sound old right there. It's like, yeah,
I'm doing more so with COVID because I have more time on my hands. I imagine if I was sitting at home all day, then my Twitter feed probably wouldn't be as interesting as it is right now.
Okay.
Because I have a lot of time to think. And that's the thing that Twitter is for. It's like you have a thought, tweet that thought.
Yes. Unfortunately, right? Okay, I'm not going to even get in there. Look, well, if we're looking for Aisha Dickerson, Dr. Aisha Dickerson, we can find her on Twitter. And so we'll just Google that name because as she's told us, we can Google anything.
Yeah, I tell students all the time, Google me. I'm one of the easiest people to find. You want my email address? If you Google my name, the first thing that comes up is my Hopkins faculty page. And right on that page is my email address.
All right. Well, that is what we'll do. So look for a tons of email from people who listen to you on the podcast and got some questions.
Yeah, and if they have a question, again, just make sure that your email is interesting enough for me not to delete it.
I need for you, but I need for the listeners to know she's serious. So, you know.
I am so serious. Like, Dr. Dickerson, I heard you on the podcast and I was wondering if you were taking students. That's not how that works.
Is that how this works? My paper. Did you hear that I got a couple of papers? Like, well, Aisha, thank you so much for taking time out with me today. I am so serious. I'm glad that you agreed to it. And I always love that I could just reach out and you be like, yeah, I got some time here. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Anything for you, Sabrina. We go way back.
Look,